America,
States of America,
and to the
to the
republic
republic for which it stands,
and
one nation under God,
indivisible,
indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
and justice for all.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the December 15, 2020 meeting of the Egg Harbor City Municipal Land Use Board. In compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of this meeting was provided by posting on the City Hall bulletin board and website and by notification to our newspapers of record. And I ask the secretary to please make this announcement part of the public record.
Yes.
And we have John Garth and someone else are joining. Maybe Andrew, I'm not sure. Okay. Somebody just signed in by phone. Is that Andrew or Sean?
No, Marie Johns.
Hey, Marie.
is
Hi, Marie.
Hi.
Marie. We could see you the last time. What happened?
I know, I screwed up.
Okay, well, we'll get you straight. Don't worry.
Okay,
All right. I'm gonna change your name, Marie, so we know who you are.
okay.
You sound great.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. So Donna, if you would, roll call, please.
Okay. Mayor Petty,
Here.
Mr. Ross, Mr. Peterson,
Here.
Mr. Walker, Mr. Garth,
Here.
Dennis McKenna,
Here.
Michael McKenna,
Here.
Mr. Molyneux,
Here.
Mrs. Torres, Mr. Dixon, Mr. Hare, Mrs. Johns,
Here,
Mr. Manos,
Here.
Mr. McGowan.
Here.
And Secretary here.
Okay, thank you, Donna.
Welcome.
Minutes, meeting November 17th, 2020. Is there a motion for approval?
I make the
Anyone?
motion. I'll make. the motion.
Second, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried.
And Donna, anyone who wasn't here last month would just be an abstention on the minutes and the resolution that we're about to move.
Okay.
You just-
Okay, and then we have resolution number 8 of 2020. John Donahoe, 209-215 New York Avenue. This is to memorialize the action taken at the last meeting. Is there a motion?
I'll make it a motion.
I'll make the motion.
Motion seconded. Roll call, please, Donna.
Mayor Petty,
No.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Garth,
No.
Dennis McKenna,
Yes.
Michael McKenna,
Yes.
Mr. Molyneux,
Yes.
Mrs. Johns wasn't here.
I can't vote anyhow.
Okay. That's it.
Thank you, Donna.
Mhm.
Number 7, new business. Ryan, good evening, sir. You gave us some information regarding the model ordinance and maybe have an update, and I'll leave it with you. Maybe you can bring us up to speed.
Sure. So I'm hoping that everyone had a chance to review our cover letter and then the model ordinance that we provided. The city is sort of on the cusp of beginning the reexamination process, and we're trying to get ahead of a couple of emerging issues, preparing some documentation on behalf of the city. So this is one of the areas that we're starting to look at, and given the city's interest in developing an ordinance for this and a few other things, we're trying to put forth recommendations so that they can move forward in a timely manner. Adopting a master plan reexamination and the ordinance that results from that is a lengthy process. So we're just trying to, shave some time off of that so that the city is ready to move forward and adopt these changes as quickly as possible. So I'm going to go through a quick recap of the sort of the model ordinance and why they ended up where they ended up. I think it helps for everyone to have a good understanding of the background of how they got to this point, and what impact that has on the city. So we'll start going through NJSA, which regulated community residences, used to require that residences be spaced 1,500 feet apart, and that the number of persons residing in community residence municipality was limited to 50 persons or 0.5% of the population of that municipality. That was invalidated by the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, and it impacted a whole bunch of municipalities who had adopted ordinances that reflected those same requirements, Woodbury being one of them. So the Supreme Court and all of the reflecting ordinances sort of have to be responsive to the Fair Housing Act, which provides protections for persons with disabilities. Part of that, it specifies protection from false or overprotective assumptions about the needs of handicapped people, as well as unfounded fears or difficulties about the problems that their tendencies may pose. So zoning regulations for community residents for people with disabilities should seek to achieve legitimate government interests, actually achieve those legitimate government interests, and be the least drastic means to actually achieving those legitimate government interests. They're essentially saying, there may be needs to regulate these, but you have to do the least amount possible and be the least, impactful and be direct. If there's a legitimate purpose, make sure you're focused on that purpose and not overly broad. So what leads to the ability to regulate these and what sort of promotes regulation to some degree is that it's recognized that the clustering of community residences on a block or in a single neighborhood undermines the ability for community residences to achieve normalization and community integration with their residents. Essentially, the idea is these facilities are supposed to be located in neighborhoods. If there was seven of these types of facilities on one block, that would really defeat the entire purpose. The purpose is they're integrated with a neighborhood and surrounded by, if not single family homes, families. The idea is they're trying to integrate people back into communities, into residential settings. So having everything clustered in one spot would defeat that purpose. So that there is recognition that regulation for spacing is appropriate. What that is comes down to individual municipalities, layouts, and how to enforce that without, again, being overly broad and having sort of arbitrary restrictions. Another area that gives you the ability to regulate is heightened scrutiny of a use variance is required or warranted when a proposed recovery home for people with disabilities fails to meet the definition of a single housekeeping unit or both of the criteria to be allowed as a conditional use. So a recovery home, depending on how it's run, there's an Oxford model and a non-Oxford model. An Oxford model home is run by the people who live in the home. There is no hired help there. It's not managed by an individual, who's paid by a company. Those facilities are separately regulated and licensed and operate more like a rooming house or a boarding house than a residential facility. So an Oxford model home, the city doesn't really have the ability to regulate. They're classified as a single family home. They don't require a second or any special permitting. They are free to exist in any single family zone. There's nothing that any municipality can do to regulate those types of facilities. There are, however, the F license type facilities, and that is the ones that are regulated by DCA. They are licensed facilities. I believe there are some in town that are that model. And again, those do not operate as a single family home. You do have the ability to regulate those. One point that is stressed over and over is that the Fair Housing Act affords protections to individuals with or without disabilities, or I'm sorry, affords no protections to individuals with or without disabilities who present a direct threat to the persons or property of others, provided, however, that determining whether someone possesses such a direct threat must be made on an individualized basis and cannot be on general assumptions or speculations about the nature of a disability. So essentially what that says is anyone who has a disability, the state considers, if you have a disability, you are classified that way, and you may be a resident in these types of homes. The nature of your disability can't automatically label you as a threat to the community. So whether you have Asperger's or you're a recovering alcoholic, you're a person with a disability, and again, the nature of your disability can't be used to discriminate against you. If you're determined to be a threat to persons or property in the area around you, it's because of the history that you personally have demonstrated. It can't just be that, oh, he's a recovering drug addict. It has to be, specific to the person and their activities. You cannot discriminate, again, based on someone's disability, whatever that is. So the model to move forward with regulating these facilities is to treat them, the type F facilities, which are licensed, as a conditional use in a zone. So the ordinance would reflect spacing requirements, which will determine through the reexamination process, and require that these facilities, that when they go get a license, they would have to come into the zoning officer and acknowledge that they are this type of licensed facility, and they would have to essentially, verify that they comply with the ordinance. If they meet the conditions, which would be, spacing requirements and any other potential conditions which the ordinance would contain, then they would be permitted to go into the zone without needing a use variance. If they did not comply with the spacing or any other requirements of the ordinance, then they would have to come to this board for approval for a use variance. Because I had some discussions with the city solicitor about, there has to be a triggering point for someone to actually review something. How do you bring people in to make sure that they're complying with the ordinance? And that seems to be the best way to do it. And you don't want it to be that every one of these facilities is required to come into the board for a use variance. You just want to set the criteria, and either you meet them or you don't, and then you have to come to this board for relief if you'd like to pursue that in that area. So that's how we're proposing to regulate the facilities. The specifics we'll have to dig through a little bit more as we get into the reexamination process. The Woodbury ordinance and some others listed some good resources for how to develop those criteria and what rules make sense and are justifiable for what the ordinance language should say. But we're confident this time that what is presented in the Woodbury ordinance and others, frankly, is really the framework for how your ordinance is going to look. We're going to have different linear footages, and we might tweak some terms here or there, but for a good portion of it, it sort of is what it is. Your definitions match up with the definitions provided by state law as they need to, and the manner in which they're regulated and the manner in which the ordinance revisions would need to be incorporated into your ordinance is pretty straightforward. So our recommendation to the board at this point is to recommend that City Council authorize the city solicitor to begin preparing a draft ordinance that would fit with Egg Harbor City's ordinance, that we could, again, sort of, tailor the details, adjust the details at the completion of either the reexamination or this portion of the reexamination report. We'll have to bring that report back to this board, and then ultimately this board will make specific recommendations on linear footages for distances and other regulations to City Council. They'll at that point be able to make some minor adjustments and bring it to City Council for adoption much quicker than if we just presented them with findings and then they had to start drafting the ordinance. So does that make sense?
Yeah. So Ryan, what's to keep facilities from bypassing us by going with this Oxford model?
Frankly, nothing. The state has, in their infinite wisdom, determined that if an Oxford model home is a single family home, and it can be regulated no differently than any other single family home. It's people living in a house, paying the utilities together, setting their own rules for the house. That is the definition of a single family home, and you therefore cannot regulate those facilities separately than any other single family. And Leo, please correct me if I'm making any misstatements, but
No,
Is there
that's accurate. Go ahead.
requirements for, how many occupants per square foot and that kind of thing that they have to abide by, like a single family home? I mean,
yeah, all of that would be covered by the standard building code that the city has adopted. There are limits on the number of persons in a bedroom based on the number of square feet, number of occupants in a household based on the number of bathrooms. And it's not necessarily what, you might want them to be, but those are, pretty much nationally recognized, or at least some of them state recognized requirements for, minimum sizes.
so they're as enforceable as any single family home in any neighborhood then?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, if your neighbor has, 11 kids and they have them all crammed into bedrooms, if they're the right square footage bedrooms, it kind of is what it is. And, the Oxford model home is no different, though I believe they're capped at 10 people, regardless of the size.
And how does the rental aspect affect this? Because I know with all the rentals that we have, at least we have the ability to go in and do inspections. That would that apply to that model home?
So, any Oxford model home would by definition be a rental, because the people there are there temporarily, and they are contributing to a home, but they're not a direct owner of it. So I mean, I think any Oxford model home should be registered as a rental, just due to the nature of how it operates. It's not an owner occupied housing unit.
Mhm. So I don't know the letter or the ordinances that the city has, but when occupancy changes in a rental unit,
Mhm.
they're supposed to get an inspection. And it's self-regulated or community regulated. They call and say, hey, the rental next door, there's new people moved in, and then we go over and do an inspection. But if that doesn't happen, or they don't voluntarily come and say, hey, we've got new people here, you may never get the opportunity to do an inspection.
So Donna,
Unless it's a yearly thing.
Correct.
Code enforcement does it yearly, I do believe, right, Donna?
Yes, there's an
Okay.
annual housing inspection done
Okay.
once a
So
year.
that you
I
would
would
catch it
suspect
up.
for an Oxford home, it would probably be limited to the annual, because an individual tenant turnover is going to happen with some frequency.
Right.
Probably doesn't rise to the level of triggering a new CO.
And we have an Oxford home on Buffalo Avenue, actually, and it really hasn't been a problem. The problem comes in when we don't have any authority to control these housing units that aren't Oxford housing.
Mhm.
And the state is the sole enforcer and things like that. They're the ones that seem to be problematic, not the Oxford house.
Right. So
far as
those are the
I'm
ones you
concerned.
do have the ability to regulate. And there is, again, I sort of read that one section about, the Fair Housing Act affords no protections to individuals with or without disabilities who present a direct threat to persons or property of others. So, we had this discussion at the city level. If there are, residences, either, the entire body of residents or individual residents who are problematic, you need to build a case history against them to demonstrate that they are in fact a direct threat to persons or property of others. Because these facilities are regulated at the state level, even though they're not currently regulated by the city. They are permitted facilities, so they ultimately have to answer someone to maintain their permit. So if you can build a case history that, occupants are direct threats to persons or property, then there is an enforcement mechanism, because they're not at that point protected by the Fair Housing Act.
And I just would add that that's easier said than done, because the people,
I agree.
especially on the in the one community where one has popped up, are scared that they're going to take retribution on their children and things like that, are around the neighborhood and whatnot.
Sure. I mean, I definitely understand the complications with that, but that's, unfortunately, that's the only path to rectifying the situation.
Hey, Ryan, this is Bob Roy. Can you hear me?
Hi, Todd.
Brian, this is Bob Ross. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said Todd at first. How you doing, Bob?
Hey, good. We have that ordinance for nuisance homes that when the police get called there, we have penalty prices that go up. Is that still in effect?
Yes, it is.
And it would apply in this situation, among other techniques. You know, you can go through code enforcement, you can go through the police department. There are numerous avenues to report and document incidents that could be used to demonstrate that the facility, you know, is in fact housing persons who are a direct threat to persons or property.
Does the state cover that fine, or the homeowner, whoever the mortgage holder is,
It's
or?
the landlord,
Right.
usually,
The manager of the facility. That's,
it's usually,
Right, but what if it's a state-run facility? How does that hit? How does that affect things?
I guess we'll find
well,
out.
listen, I can only use the example we have. The facility we have now that's causing problems is owned by a landlord. There is a manager, and then the state oversees it because they're licensed. So generally, this is what happens. These people buy a lot, they put a house up, and then they turn it into a facility like we have. So the landlord is probably getting probably $10,000 a month from the state to house the people in there. So the fine would go to the landlord.
Yeah, I don't believe that these facilities are generally state owned or managed. They're just state licensed and overseen.
I think the state's supposed to do an annual inspection. But that's who issues the F license. And the one thing they will do, if you're operating without the license, they will take action, at least in my experience, to require you to get that license. But I don't know how much that helps us, other than making sure they're licensed. And then it looks like we're going to develop a spacing requirement. Woodbury came up with 528 feet. I'm not quite sure how. I haven't looked at that. I don't know. Egg Harbor City is obviously different than Woodbury, but they had a reason for that. I don't know if Ryan's gotten into that yet at all. But I don't know if it matters to us so much. But
They looked at a couple different studies, and they looked at the block and grid pattern for their community, and arrived at 528 feet would prohibit multiple on a single block for the vast majority of their blocks, the way that their streets are laid out. Not having done a complete analysis, we're going to land somewhere in the 600-foot range, because our blocks are 600 feet long. They're all the same for the most part. So, it makes it a lot easier. We're not an organically grown municipality with, odd layouts and, varying street lengths and widths and all that. 600 feet, that covers a block all over town. So, whether it's 600 or 560 or somewhere in that neighborhood, the intent is to have one per block be permitted. And that's,
I also have a question, if I could ask.
yes.
Jack?
Yeah, please do.
The original thought process on this was that we were going to solve this problem through zoning. It doesn't sound like that's going to happen. It just sounds like you have a spacing issue now. However, it was supposed to be zoning, because our main concern is not having these facilities across from the street from a school, okay, and things like that, where children are present and the
Yes.
residents of these places are exposing themselves and urinating on the grass and such things, and making cat calls and things like that to the children and whatnot, and the parents that walk by. So I'm wondering if that's still what we're going to pursue or not.
So we are still regulating it with a zoning approach, or approaching the regulation through zoning. The zoning would be through making these facilities a conditional use in all single-family housing zones, because that is the most restrictive approach that's required. You have to permit them in all single-family housing zones. One other thing that we have looked at and not made any recommendations yet to this point, because we need to make sure that all of the backup, not that we need to make sure, we need to investigate and see that ensure that this approach is appropriate, would be to consider spacing requirements from schools similar to that of the drug-free zoning map. The impetus being that the tendency for people to relapse is far greater than the tendency for people to, begin using. And that therefore the prevalence of drugs, I suppose, in those facilities is more likely than in a typical single family home. If the evidence, bears out, if there is documentation that, backs that up, that hypothesis up, and that's the direction that, the city is able to move in, then we certainly will do that. But again, we're not able to make any recommendations to that without having, the proper research and being able to point to documentation that states that is, an actual documented issue, and that's something that the city could approach.
Well, I would think that logic would dictate that if you use that analogy, that probably buy a school would be the best case scenario for these people, because apparently there are no drug sales and things like that due to the heavier fines. So they could make the reverse argument for that, as far as I can see, but I could be incorrect. You would definitely have to prove, I get what you're saying, that they're using drugs, but conversely, you could say that it's a safer area to be across the street from the school because it's a drug zone, it's a drug-free zone.
There's numerous arguments to be made in I'm sure both directions. That's why we need to go through and do the literature search and see what the best available research provides, and what makes sense from a regulatory standpoint. We have to go ahead.
The Woodbury ordinance was challenged at some point in its history. Is it, these are
So-
revisions that they made to fix that?
Yeah, the Woodbury ordinance modeled after the previous version of NJSA 55D 66.1. That was challenged and defeated at the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court level. That is what contained 1,500 foot spacing and then 50 persons, or 0.5% of the population of the municipality. But again, numerous municipalities, Woodbury being one of them, reflected those same requirements in their ordinance. So by extension of the state law being invalidated, the other ordinances were invalidated as well. So Woodbury's ordinance, I don't know that they were the one whose ordinance was challenged directly, but their ordinance reflected the same language as of language that was struck down at the Supreme Court. So they ended up repealing their ordinance.
They may not have actually had to litigate, but they had to amend their ordinance accordingly.
Right. If we had the same ordinance as Galloway Township and Galloway Township lost in court with the same ordinance, then your ordinance is effectively invalidated.
Mhm.
So, that's the position that Woodbury found themselves in. Like I said, they did their homework. They came up with justifiable solutions, to provide for the ability to construct these facilities in appropriate locations. So, and that's what our goal is here.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan, for that update and information.
All right.
And any other discussion regarding the master plan reexamination and the other stuff that Ryan was?
So Ryan, you want us to recommend to city council that they authorize their solicitor to begin a draft ordinance modeled after Woodbury, so something sort of ready to go, correct?
Right. Yeah. In the interest of time, we're going to land at something that's going to look really similar to this, at least in its framework. So, yeah, that would save the city time towards being able to adopt the ordinance.
Okay. Someone offer that motion.
I'll make a motion.
I'll
A
second
second.
it. I'll
All
second
those in
it.
favor? All in
Aye.
favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed?
Aye.
You're opposed? No. Everybody's in favor?
I'm in
No
favor,
opposite?
but I'm still confused as to the big issue that it was that we had to handle this through
Well,
zoning and the master plan and everything else. And it seems like if it's only going to be 600 feet, I don't see how that even, how this even came up.
Lisa,
I
I'll-
just don't understand it. I'm sorry.
I'll catch you up on the like I said, we're not at a point where we're ready to make recommendations, but I'll reach out to you to catch you up on, where we're going and other things that we're considering.
Okay.
You have to be very careful to not put the cart before the horse with this type of regulation.
Okay, thank you, folks. Any further discussion? Old business. I'd like to appoint a subcommittee to discuss professional positions for 2021. After the meeting, Keith Molyneux and Dee McKenna and myself hang around for a couple minutes and let's discuss the RFPs and then we'll make a recommendation for the reorganization meeting. Is there anyone from the public in attendance that would have any comment? No one from the public? Donna, did you get that Bob Ross came into the meeting late?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you.
You're
Any comments, questions from the board?
I do have one other real quick thing, Jeff.
Sure.
I was talking to Leo about earlier. Am I able to share my screen or not really?
Yeah.
How to-
You should be able to.
When I hit it, it says host disabled participant screen share.
Okay, well, let me fix that.
Okay.
Let's see.
Leo, I figured while we're on the call, I'll go over the Wawa thing.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
I'm trying to figure it out here, Ryan. Hold.
Okay.
Meeting settings.
Worst case scenario, I'll just turn my webcam around and point it at my screen.
There we go.
Okay, perfect.
Did I get you?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
I don't need to share sound. Okay. So can everyone see? No, not yet. I'm sharing my screen. Can everyone see what looks like the Wawa plans? Well, portion of it, and my mouse sort of jumping around.
Yep.
Okay. So Wawa sent a revised plan. They, in going through their stormwater layout, arrived at needing to make some changes based on feedback from Pinelands. And they eliminated an underground basin, which is right here. And they eliminated the vast majority of a surface basin right here. And they are now instead coming back with a new basin over here, which would be, this is their access road off Atlantic Avenue. So it would be just off the side of where the terrace is now, where you turn into the terrace, it would be just next to that. And then they'll shrink the other basin up front to look like this. It also involves some revision to the piping configuration, stuff that you won't see. But I did want to go over that they, effectively are getting rid of this basin up front, significantly reducing it, and then building another basin over here, back by the entrance. So we're, given the way that the resolution is written, we believe I could approve this administratively. So as long as everyone's okay with it here, rather than drag them back to the board, I will let them know that they are okay to proceed with the revised configuration.
Any discussion? Sounds okay with us. I mean, they're just changing where they're dumping water, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much. I don't really think anyone would have any, very strong opinions about it, but it is, from a site plan perspective, it's pretty significant revision to, where you're going to have.
What would the
giant holes.
downside be?
There's none really. I mean, originally they had a basin up along Philadelphia Avenue. Now they'll have a small one at the corner of Philadelphia and Atlantic, and then a larger one back by their driveway. I mean, frankly, from an aesthetic standpoint, I think this is more advantageous because you get your basins farther away from Philadelphia Avenue. So, I mean,
Does that have any effect on that other piece that maybe they ever want to somebody want to put a fast food restaurant in? Or
Well,
whatever that may have been?
They had some aspirations of putting something here. They have chipped away at that lot size pretty significantly. So I don't know what would fit here at this point. I mean, they might be able to go back and make more substantial revisions to the stormwater management system. The basin that's in the far back here, they did have some additional area. I thought they could have expanded that one, but it's really up to them to bring their plans to the board. So if they want to go back and, try to reconfigure and add another site at the corner here, I think they'll have some challenges, but I think it's doable. So,
That's fine
So,
with me. I just was curious.
Are the basins big enough to accommodate future growth other than the Wawa?
they are not. I made that recommendation as we went through this. I said, listen, just plot this out as impervious and oversize your basins to accommodate, and they did not pursue that. So if they went forward with another pad site here, they would be starting from scratch.
So it doesn't look like they're really gonna put something in there unless they're gonna spend big money again.
Yeah, I mean, if they can get a large tenant, if you could get, I don't know, Chick-fil-A or Taco Bell or one of the national chains who, pays a solid rent to operate a facility, then it would make sense to do it. But, it would be a significant lift to be able to do that. I think more than
You
likely,
can
we'd end
put
up with a de facto partner here.
Hey, Ryan,
Yes.
they could put in a water retention underground.
Well, that's what they had
And-
proposed initially, and they revised away from that.
Yeah, but I mean, they could always go back to that.
Yeah, they could convert some to underground. Like I said, they could enlarge that basin in the back. None of that is insurmountable, but none of it's free either. So,
No. But, I ran into
Well,
that over at the electric company site.
yeah,
Underground is expensive.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you guys did it right. Just a couple streets over, right off Atlantic Avenue.
Yep.
So, but yeah, that was it. I just wanted to, show that change to everyone so that, if you see it getting constructed, you pull out your plans and you're wondering what happened. That would be why. Like I said, I'll make that approval administratively now.
Okay, thank you, Ryan, for sharing that.
Thank you.
Hey, Ryan?
Yeah.
John Garth. So this is a change from what they originally presented to us, correct?
Correct.
But we approved this plan based off of that. So I think all of us have the same interest here. We'd like to see more rateables, and by doing this, or taking away that opportunity for us to achieve another rateable on that property. So
Well, the basin
have to-
area, the basin area is pretty much the same. I mean, if you'll note, they have this large facility up here by Philadelphia Avenue. So that facility is relocated back to this formerly empty piece. But frankly, if you're going to have another rateable, I would think it would rather face Philadelphia Avenue here. You'd rather have this available frontage. So if you're interested in encouraging development here, this is probably a change for the better, because you still have a little basin at the corner, but you have some direct access to Philadelphia Avenue, which you did not have in the previous configuration.
Okay, well, if you're saying that there's still an opportunity for, some other development that would provide us that rateable, then I guess we didn't really lose anything other than where they're choosing to.
They're just not going to spend the money up front, John. They could, but they're not going to.
Right.
Okay.
They can always come back. There's enough room there to do whatever they want. They just have to, pay for all the soft costs that they're paying for now, the engineering and remobilizing equipment and all that. But I guess they're just not prepared to incur any more costs than they already have.
Well, and from a practical standpoint, usually these deals go forward when there's a contractual agreement in place. Not a lot of developers have enough cash laying around that they can pursue,
Speculate.
tens of thousands of dollars worth of approvals and hope they can line up a tenant. You kind of have to get them in place. And even if it costs you a couple more dollars, you have income coming in through the contract, and you have the security that you have a tenant ready to come in once you're done. So, I mean, it's unfortunate that it wastes resources, but from an execution standpoint, I understand, why things evolve the way they do.
So I do have one other question since we're on this topic of Wawa. When they came in, they proposed removing the public parking along Philadelphia Avenue, of which I expressed concern that the Teamsters would lose the ability to have parking for their facility that's already there and been there. And my recommendation was that they increase the sidewalk width along Atlantic Avenue and increase the lighting. Was that ever finalized in their final plan and approval? It was
So,
put on the onus of, the professionals to make sure that happened without having to come back for plan review. I was just wondering what was the final solution to that?
so I don't believe that we added additional lighting along Atlantic. I think we looked at the lighting that was there, and there's significant spillage coming from the parking on the other side. Again, this is 6-8 months ago, so I'm not positive if that was resolved. That's my recollection. And then as far as the parking on Philadelphia Avenue, the last update that I got from the developer from DOT was that they were not going to require them to eliminate the parking on the opposite side. So they're going to have to eliminate it on their side. I think we all understood the need for that. It's, the parking's in their site triangle pulling in and out. But the parking on the opposite side, on the Teamsters side, should remain.
Correct. But part of that was I had asked if they'd be willing to increase the sidewalk width to allow better usage to the public parking that exists behind the park, knowing that they were taking away some of the public parking on the Wawa side of Philadelphia Avenue. And
Yes.
they had expressed agreement to that. I was just wondering if that agreement ever made it to the actual plans.
I believe that they provided a 5-foot sidewalk along Atlantic Avenue, but I will check. They actually have to make a minor revision to the plan that's provided here. Yeah, in fact, it's really hard to see, but I think that the width of the sidewalk on this plan is actually wider than the width of the sidewalk over here. So I think they
I
went from a
remember that
4
too,
to a
John.
5.
Where they said they were gonna do that.
Yeah, I think they did go from 4, which is the minimum, to a 5-foot sidewalk. I mean, if we want to go to a 6, I'll just tell them that's what they need to do. You have a,
Is there extra lighting in there too, Ryan?
don't recall if they did adjust the lighting there. Let me pull up the plans real quick. Let's see.
So Ryan, is there access off of Cincinnati Avenue?
To the Wawa property?
Yeah,
Yeah, there's a driveway that goes out. I mean, you can barely see it off the page here, but there's a driveway that goes out this way,
okay,
and
I
there's a
thought
driveway
so.
that goes out to Atlantic Avenue.
So if somebody parks in the train parking lot, they're gonna walk through the Wawa parking lot to go to the Teamsters building. They
Yeah,
could
they-
walk through the Wawa parking lot to go to
They
the
could-
Teamsters building.
They
They
could do
could
that.
park in
There
the
is
Wawa parking lot.
there's a sidewalk here, and then I have a crosswalk that goes across along the side of the building, and then a crosswalk that leads across their driveway here. So we did require them to install an accessible route
Uh-huh.
through this entire side and from Philadelphia, Route 30 rather. We did make them go back and do that because they had not proposed them originally. I'm looking through try to find the lighting plan right now. Train, utility, lighting. So they have an additional lighting fixture out here, which is near their driveway. There is, I believe, an existing Cobra head up here. So you should have the lighting from here spilling down. They're showing it spilling down to about this area, and then the Cobra head should spill pretty close to this area. I mean, it's difficult to get light that projects across the site. I don't think they're going to want to put anything here because they're considering this as their future lot. And it's difficult to get something that sort of throws across without blinding drivers that are driving towards it. But I'll reach out to them and see if we can't, maybe get another floodlight or something out on the corner, or rather a Cobra headlight out on the corner if there's not enough illumination along this stretch already. So I will check back with them and make sure that we have sufficient coverage along that whole walk.
Okay, any other comments?
Yeah, we do have a code right at the corner there.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks, John.
Yeah, no, appreciate the comment and question.
Any other comments from the board? Mayor, you have anything that?
You're
You're
muted.
muted.
I'm mute.
Just to say thank you to everyone who served on the board this year, and thank you for those who are willing to serve on the board next year. And thanks to Bob Ross, this will be his last meeting. Bob chose not to run again for city council, so we'll miss you, Bob, that's for sure.
Thanks, Bob.
Well, I enjoyed being part of this meeting. I really did.
And we enjoyed having you. The
Always.
only other thing I could say is that the bike path is still going forward from Deeserwig to the lake. That's in the works now. Apparently, we've been given priority with DOT, so you can be looking for that in the near future. And Tom Gill I've been in contact with him quite a bit, and he's still interested in the Tackle Direct at the lake. So he has hired Tim Mickle as a planner. So we'll be hearing from Tim hopefully in the near future about the plans for that. And that's it. But thanks again for everybody. I really do appreciate everything you do and for being so dedicated to Egg Harbor City.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yep, thank you.
Any other comments from board members? Wish everybody a safe and happy holiday. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. My subcommittee, if you would hang around after the meeting ends to discuss business. Okay, motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Is there a second? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you,
Good
Donna.
night, everyone. Happy
Good night,
holidays.
everyone.
Yeah.
Happy
Happy
holidays.
holidays.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Jack, do I go or do I stay?
You can hang around if you want, Donna. So you guys saw the RFPs. Hold on.
That's a song, Donna.